Hello everybody, I'm Nora Burrows. Today I want to make 3 pillow covers for this pillow here. I want them to be seasonal. You may say why not 4, but I think spring and summer could be the same one. So you could have fall, winter, spring, summer. So this is a 12-inch by 18-inch pillow here. And I have an idea. Let's get started. I'll show you what I'm thinking. I have this layer cake called Quaint Cottage. I also actually have this in a fat quarter bundle, but I'm going to start with the layer cake and I'm going to separate this into 3 categories: the spring/summer, the fall, and the winter. Each pillow cover will be different. So the spring and summer one will have some flowers, the fall will have leaves, and the winter will have these really cool stars. I've pulled out the pieces from the layer cake that I think are, the most spring-like. Obviously there's a lot of florals here. This is a lattice work piece, and some of these have 2 pieces and some of them just 1. This beautiful, almost Art Deco looking piece here. And then you can see it in a different colorway back there. This one has some little tiny dots, another floral. There's that piece again. This one is pretty cool. That will be useful. It's kind of a background. More floral, the lattice work in another colorway, and then these cool houses. I'm going to be making a flower, and I've cut 4 squares to be my flower petals. Each one of these squares is 2.5 inches. Then I've also cut 4 additional squares to be 3/4 inches. I'm going to put these in the corners. You can see I've drawn a diagonal line. I'm going to sew directly on that line. I have all of my corners sewn on here. I'm going to trim off the back 1/4 inch and iron it nice and flat. My pieces are pressed, and so what I'm going to do is put each one of these with the triangle facing down. What I've done is cut 4 more squares with this crosshatch fabric. I think it's really soft and pretty, and put a diagonal line on each one of my squares. I'm going to put each one of these in the corner to the right of my yellow triangle. And so right along each of these lines. Then I'll trim 1/4 inch away from the sewn line and press nice and flat, just like I did for these pieces here. And these pieces I cut to be 1¼ inch square. And my 4 pieces here are done. Let's lay them out. So it should look something like this. It's like a little pinwheel flower. Let's make the base of the flower next. I've cut a background square to be 4.5 inches by 2.5 inches. And then I've cut my leaf fabric, 2 leaf squares. So this is how this is going to look. Like this, and then I'll put a stem down the middle. So I've cut these squares to be 2.5 inch square, and then on the back I've drawn my diagonal there. So let's start with one. We're gonna put one all the way to the side. We'll sew right down this line. Now, in addition, I'm gonna sew another line. Let me draw it for you. 1/2 inch below the first line, I'm going to sew on both of these lines. I've sewn on both of these lines. I'm going to cut directly in between the lines and then open this up and give it a nice press. Now, if you're using directional fabric, this probably would have been better turned because it would have looked more like grassy leaf instead of horizontal, but it's okay. I'm going to move forward. It'll look like this. Now I'm going to do the same thing for the other side. Put this in the corner. Draw my line 1/2 inch below, sew on both lines, cut the back part off, and then iron. Give it a nice, good press. It should look like this. Now, you'll have 2 little pieces like this when you finish. I'm going to iron those little 1/2 square triangles. I'm not exactly sure how I'll use this in the pillow, but I'm going to save this and potentially use it in another part. At the same time as I sew this one onto here, I'm also going to sew this unit together. So what I'll do is sew these two pieces right side together. So 1/4 inch right along this line. Do the same with this. Sew these two pieces together 1/4 inch along this line. I have 3 units here, my leaves and then my 2 flower units. I'm going to sew this piece to this piece 1/4 inch along this edge. Open it up, give it a nice press, and then I'll sew this piece to this piece, right sides together, 1/4 inch around this edge, and press. Here's flower number 1. I still need to add the stem here. I'm going to do that later. First, I'd like to make 2 other flowers with different fabrics for the petals. My complaint is that I wish that there was more contrast between the petals and the background and the petals and the middle. I think it will read more like a flower once I have the stem. I'm going to make the other 2 off camera and then we'll talk about what to do next. My flowers are coming along. I want to do my stem next, and I did make a mistake because here you go. I can see I did my stem on this one. You want to be able to sew your stem all the way to the edge so that it gets caught in the seam allowance. If you attach these 2 units together first, your stem doesn't have anywhere to go. So I'm going to seam rip this off and add my stem, but let me show you what I did to add my stem. I cut a piece of 1 inch wide fabric, a little longer, or actually much longer than I needed, much longer than the width of my unit here. I ironed my stem in half, then opened it up and folded the bottom raw edge to meet my middle line, the line that I created by ironing. And then my top raw edge to meet the bottom raw edge. And as you go along, you press. You fold it over, and so now, well, you'll want to iron on top so that you get rid of that folded line there. And then you're going to place it on top of your leaf unit like this, and you're going to top stitch as close to the edge as you can on both sides. Then you're going to trim off the top and the bottom, the excess, so it looks like this. So you can see I top stitched incredibly close to the edge on both the right and the left. I used my half square triangles. I ended up with 6 of them, so I put 3 on each side. I'll just make a strip along the bottom, and I've cut 1 inch pieces to go in between each one. You can see I already sewed 1 piece on there. I'll also cut 1 inch strips to bookend this middle flower here. So I'll just cut it to be a little bit longer in terms of length and then have it be a 1 inch strip. So I'll cut 2 of those. This is coming together really nicely. I do have, I could be critical in some ways, but I won't. I think generally speaking, it's great. The one thing I would do differently if I did this again is, there's 2 of these leafy things for each flower. And so what I could have done is just made another one of kind of these units and really put it right underneath each flower. Instead, I was kind of trying to go for this grass idea, which is also fine. And then I've cut these 2 inch squares to go on each side. It's a little bit bigger than I need, but I can trim down. So I'll attach these 2 pieces to the grass unit, and then I'll attach this full unit to the flowers. My pillowcase top is almost done. I'm really happy with it. I think it looks great. I've cut these 1 inch strips, so I'll just do a little border of background here along the top, the bottom, and each one of the sides. That won't get us quite to the edge of the pillowcase top, so we'll need to do something around the edge, but let's first add this little border of background and then see how it looks. We just need to add a border around the whole thing and then we'll be done. I've cut all 4 of my strips to be 2.5 inches wide, and then I've just trimmed them to be the length that I need. The pillow form is 12 by 18 inches, which means I need my quilt top here to be 12.5 by 18.5 to take into account seam allowance. And here's our first finished top, the spring summer top. I love it. I think it's awesome. We'll do the fall one next. And here are the fall fabrics from that layer cake. We have the houses again. The houses are a little bit hard to use, I've found. This is kind of this would be a nice background because it looks a little bit snowy, though that wouldn't be very fall-like. This could be a good background, the crosshatch, some flowers, plaid. This is that print that I really like. It was in light pink and white in the spring fabrics that I chose, but we didn't end up using it. Another one of the flowers. So here, this one is more of like a rusty brown, and then this one is more of a goldy brown. And then another plaid. I'm going to start with these two fabrics. I'm going to be making a maple leaf. I'm going to use this for the leaf and this for the background. My only concern is that it might be a little blendy, but you know, there won't be enough contrast, but I'm going to try it. I think it'll be okay. I have cut 6 of my background squares to be 2.5 inches square each, 6 of them, and then 7 of my leaf squares to also be 2.5 inch square. Now on 4 of those leaf squares, I drew a line from diagonal to diagonal, and then just like on the flower, I went 1/2 inch behind that first line and I drew another line. I'll sew right sides together, and I'll sew on that first line and then also on the second line. Now I'll cut in between, right in between the 2 lines for each of these 4 squares. And then once I cut them, I will open them up and give a nice press, just like I did with the flower blocks. I have 4 big half square triangles and 4 small. I'm going to put the small aside. I'm going to line these up to make a leaf. And there it is. This is really just a 9 patch. If you kind of separate these, you can see it's 3 by 3 blocks. And I will sew it together just like a 9 patch. You sew these 2 together, right sides together, 1/4 inch along this seam. Same with this one, same with this one. And then I will sew these 2 together along the top. This one will just be down here for a minute. Before I sew my next pieces together, I'm going to attach my stem before I attach it to the rest of my block. And I'm going to top stitch on the diagonal on this block down here. Now, as you'll notice, I also made a smaller one because I had these leftover half square triangles. I had 4 of them, as you remember, which is the perfect amount to make a second block. So these half square triangles measured 1 3/4 inches square. And so I cut another 2 background pieces to be that same size square, and another 1, 2, 3 of my leaf pieces to be 1 3/4 inches square. So I'll do the same thing with the leaf stem, or with the stem over here on the diagonal, and then I will sew these 2 together, right sides together, right along the top. And then once this is sewn on, I will sew this right sides together, 1/4 inch along the top here. Same for my smaller block. These pieces are coming along nicely, but before I move forward with those, I unfortunately realized that this piece is too, it's not wide enough. I thought that my pillow form was 12 inches by 18 inches, but it's actually 12 inches by 20 inches. So I'm going to need to sew a little strip of fabric onto each side here, but I'm not going to worry about that right now. I'll do that later. Let's keep moving with the leaves. They are now in 3 sections each. So next I'm going to sew these right sides together, 1/4 inch along this seam. I'll open it up and give it a nice press, and then I will attach this unit to this unit. My 2 leaf blocks here are done. I've cut a piece of background fabric to be 2 3/4 inch tall, and then I just cut it a little bit longer than my block. I can trim it down. And I'll sew these two together, right sides together, 1/4 inch open and press. And then I cut this to be 1¼ inch wide. And then again, just a little bit taller than my main block here. And I'll attach this right sides together and sew, open it up. And then I'll have this unit completed here, and I'll attach this unit to this unit. Now that I have the body of this leaf block done, I'm going to put on the sides and then the top and bottom. These are each 1 inch wide. My leaf unit is done. I've cut these strips of orange to go, they're 1½ inches wide, each one of them. I'll attach the top and bottom first, and then I'll attach the sides. I've cut my top and bottom strips to be 2 3/4 inches wide. And then again, just cut them a little bit longer than my block. I'll attach those two, the top and bottom. And then I cut my sides to be 4 inches wide. And then again, I'll just cut those a little bit longer, attach the sides, and trim. I'm also going to fix this piece now. I've cut 1½ inch wide strips of this kind of dotty, snowy fabric. This is part of the line that I've been working with, and I've just cut it to be a little bit longer than the pillow top. This should make it exactly the size I need. Again, it is 12½ inches by 20½ inches that I'm looking for here. The fall pillow top is done. I really like it. Some of my fear came to fruition in the sense of I wish there was more contrast between the leaf and the background, but I think it's okay. And once I quilt it, I can quilt along the edge of the leaf, and I think that will make it pop a little bit more and it will look a little bit more leaf-like. But overall, I'm really happy with it, and I think that the borders came out really well. I also fixed the spring-summer pillow cover. We have one more to do, the winter. Let's look at the fabric. Here are the fabrics that I've chosen for the winter pillowcase cover. I have the floral, more floral, lots of florals in this line, which is a little bit hard for winter because there aren't a lot of flowers in winter, but this one could still work. And you have that print that I like so much. The crosshatch, the dot. And the dot also is in kind of this darker colorway as well. The houses, and then this brown dot. For this winter cover, I'm going to use these two pieces. I'm making some stars, some really cool stars actually. A little bit wonky, but not too wonky. This will be my background. I think it looks sky-like, and then this will be the star. I wanted this color in something that wasn't the same pattern, but I just don't have anything like that. I could do this again. That would be an option. I used this for the background in this piece here, so I don't know if I want to use it again. I decided to use both of these fabrics. I cut 4 background squares, 2½ inches, 8 background squares, 1½ inch, 4 background rectangles, 2½ inches by 1½ inch. First star fabric, I cut 4 of these to be 2½ inches by 1½ inch. 4 squares to be 1½ inch square. And then of this alternative star fabric, I cut 8 squares to be 1½ inches each. I've drawn a line on the back of each one, and I'm just gonna put right sides together. 4 with the main star fabric, and then 4 with the background fabric. I'm going to sew right on the line. And now that I've sewn on that line, I'm going to cut 1/4 inch away from that line. And I'll just throw this piece away. It's too small. For each one of these squares, I'll open it up. Give it a nice press to create 8 half square triangles. Next, I'm going to create my pinwheel here. So I'll sew right sides together, 1/4 inch seam allowance right along the edge, open this up and give it a nice press. I'll do the same with this, right sides together, sew along that seam and press, and then I'll attach this unit to this unit. So I'll have my pinwheel block. Then for these over here, I'm going to take my 4 1.5 inch background squares and sew them right sides together to my half square triangles that I just created. And I'll sew 1/4 inch seam allowance along the top right here, open them up and give a good press. You're going to take your 4 star rectangles and your 4 background rectangles. For the star rectangles, you're going to turn them over and you're going to draw a line diagonal this way, not this way. It's important that they're this way on every single one of your rectangles. Then you're going to put them right sides together with one of your background fabrics. Now, you can't just put them exactly together like this and then sew on the line, because when you open it up, your shape would look like this. We need a new rectangle. That's not a new rectangle. So you have to shift like this. So corner to corner, just like this. I'll show you again. So here it is upside down, and you just shift corner to corner. That way, when you open it up, you'll have a new half square rectangle. Now that I've sewn on that line, when I open it up, that's how I would like it to look. So I'm going to trim off 1/4 inch away from the line, and I'll discard these pieces and iron it nice and flat, all 4 units. Let's place the pieces of our star around so we see how this is going here. We have our pinwheel in the middle, and then we have our 2.5 inch background squares in each corner. Now I'm going to take these 4 units. Remember, we created these, and each one is going to touch the 2.5 inch square. So this should be the same fabric touching the same fabric. Like that. And then we're going to take our half square rectangles and place them in the empty spots. Just like that. Let's now put these ones right sides together, and we'll sew along this line. I always put a little clip on so I remember which side to sew on. And we'll just do that for each one of these star legs. I've laid out the pieces of my star here, and this is just really a 9 patch, similar to what we did with the leaf. So I'm going to sew this 9 patch together, just like we did for the leaf, starting with sewing these 2 pieces together along this edge, so on and so forth, and continue on until all my pieces are sewn together. Now, the other thing that I did is I cut some pieces to make some friendship stars to go either on top of each other on one side, or I can bookend this middle star. But to make those friendship stars, I needed 8, for 1 star, you need 8 background and then 5 star pieces. I cut these all to be 2-inch squares, so they'll finish at 1.5 inches. So there's 1 star, and then the second star I made in the other star fabric. And again, 8 of these, 5 of these. For all of my star pieces, I have drawn a diagonal line, and so I will put these right sides together and sew right on that line. I have a correction. So you have 5 star pieces, but only 4 of them you're going to sew right sides together on that line. 4 of them. The 5th one here you're just going to leave as is. These are now 9 patches, as you can see, and I'll sew these together just like a regular 9 patch. If you need a reminder of how to do that, you can go back to the leaf block where I show you the order in which to put these together. I have my 3 star units done here, and I could do these a couple different ways. I could put them next to each other like this, or I could bookend the middle star with each of them like that. And I think this is my preference. I'm going to go with this. I've cut my strips here to be 1.5 inches wide, and then again, just a little bit longer than my block, and I'll trim down. I'm not gonna cut any strips to go in between the blocks. I'm gonna sew them right up against the edge here. So I'll attach the top and bottom to my stars, my left and right star, and then I'll attach those units to this unit. I have my middle star unit done. I've picked out this fabric to make the borders. I cut my side borders to be 3 inches wide and longer than my unit. I'll trim them down once I attach them. I'll attach the sides first, and then I'll attach the top and bottom border. This border is 3 3/4 inches wide. And then I'll attach these borders onto the unit, and the top will be done. Here's the finished top. I think it looks great. I'm super happy with it. I think these little white flowers kind of look like snow around the sky. Really pretty. Now that my pillowcase tops are done, I'm ready to create the actual pillowcase. So what I've done is cut a piece of batting to be 20 inches by 12 inches. I've then stitched in the ditch along these lines to secure my top and the batting. You don't need to go too crazy with the quilting here because it's a decorative pillow. It's not really going to be washed. So the other thing that I've done is create the backing. I have this really beautiful fabric for the backing. I've cut 2 strips. Both of them are 9 inches by 21.5 inches. The next step is to take each one of these pieces, and you're going to fold it over a little bit more than 1/4 inch and iron all the way across. Just one seam you're going to do that on both of your cases, or both of these pieces. Once I ironed this over, I then top stitched right along the edge there on both of these pieces. What I'm going to do now is put my top right sides up. I'm going to take my first piece of backing and put it with the seam facing down. These are right sides together. Then I'm going to take my second piece and put the seam facing up, just like this. Now you're going to pin, or I clip, all the way around. Once you've clipped or pinned all the way around, you're going to turn it over and you're going to sew as close to the edge of the batting all the way around as you can. You do not need to leave an opening to flip it right side out, because we're going to use this piece here as our opening. So you stitch around the entire rectangle. I've sewn all the way around, and I've actually done it 2 times. You can see the first time here, I got super, super close to the edge of the batting, and then I went around again, and you can see my second seam line is just a little bit closer to the seam. The reason why I do 2 is because when you're putting the pillow in, sometimes you can really be pulling at these seams and you don't want them to pop. So it just adds some extra security. So now what we're going to do is cut off our corners. And our pillowcase is done. We just need to flip it inside out. So to do that, I'm going to reach my hand on the inside and pull it to the outside. And then don't forget to poke out your corners. I have a finished pillow here. I'm really happy with it. One little trick that you can do, that I will do, is you can go into the corners and you can put a little bit of that loose batting, that cottony stuff. You can just stick it right into the corners and that will just puff them out a little bit. I'm now going to do the exact same thing with the fall and spring/summer pillowcases. Here is my finished pillow and 2 pillowcases here. I think they look great. I am really happy with how this project came out. This would be a great gift, or you could just keep it. And, you know, I even think that if you folded these 2 in half and turn this over, that you could probably maybe tuck them into the pillowcase behind it. And that way you could store it with the pillow. Thank you for joining me. Don't forget to subscribe, and I'll see you next time.